All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast, and I'm happy to welcome back friend of the show, Charlie Sykes. You can read him at the To the Contrary Substack. He's decked out. He's the man in black. Charlie Sykes, great to see you.
You'll be the good cop. I'll be the bad cop. You're all in white. Okay, so we have the
I
role.
love
We have
it.
the roles sorted out here.
You know, it's good to know where you stand at the top of the show. So, you
I
know,
know.
we'll get that out of the way. Well, let me lay down a marker and say where I stand on something. I've not spoken publicly about this yet.
Yeah.
I'm very pro Sydney Sweeney. I like Sydney Sweeney. I like her new ad. And I've noticed that there is some pushback. I don't want to overblow this, but on the internet, certainly there are. And I guess there is a producer at MSNBC even who wrote something. Some people think that it's, I don't know, sexist. Maybe some people think that it's racist. What do you think of this ad campaign, Charlie Sykes?
Okay, so first of all, I did a podcast the other day. It said that pledging that I was not going to talk about Sydney Sweeney, but the more I read about it, the more I became fascinated, because it really is like a museum piece of the culture wars that we have right now. And I did restrain myself that I did not actually write the headline "The Boobs of Wokeness" on my newsletter. Okay, so I did not do that. That is not me. Complain to somebody else about that.
A YouTube headline at this point.
Well, you know what? It felt like a flashback. Watching some of the folks on the, I don't even know what you call it. The far reaches who decide that somehow this is a dog whistle, that it's Nazism, that it's all about whiteness and everything, and it's a fucking gene ad. I mean, I'm sorry. You have an attractive woman who says, I have good genes. We kind of know that this is kind of a thing, and it's a reminder of that era in which there were all of these hair triggers, these invisible tripwires of grievance that people would be pissed off. I did see one somebody on the internet say, describing that MSNBC article about, this ad is an indication of the triumph of whiteness or something like that, saying this is like finding the Japanese soldiers still fighting World War II in like 1970. I mean, they're still fighting this particular war. So even on my comment section, I had people say, Charlie, you don't understand, with the rise of white nationalism, people, deep breath. This is an ad. She's a very attractive woman. The buzz is not going to hurt them, but it's kind of a tell, isn't it?
It is weird. Look, I'm old enough to remember when people on the right made Taylor Swift their avatar of sort of white purity. Do you remember this, Charlie? Like 10 years ago, there were memes.
No,
and now
there was some,
is the enemy. She then became the enemy to these people. But this was a thing for real,
because we've always been at war with Eurasia. I mean, it is interesting. It's like we sort of pick our targets. Like, okay, so somebody shows up on an Instagram post with some MAGA relatives, and suddenly now, when she does an ad for a jean company, this is it. This is what we've been warning about. Yeah. This is Nazism, and this whole thing about admire. I'm sorry. I don't want to get too deep into all of this, and I'm not going to talk about the other aspects of
Sydney. And by the way, I don't discriminate.
Well, thank you for saying that.
There's beautiful women that come in all different sizes, packages, colors. We don't discriminate. So
here you have folks on the left who are agonizing, like, why have we lost young men? Why are young men not voting for our people? And it's like, we need to do whatever we can to get young men and make them feel wanted and valued. Wait, what are you looking at? Are you actually looking at this woman's breast? Really? Are you sick? What kind of a pervert are you? Okay, perhaps this would be a learning experience, a learning moment, right? A teaching moment.
Just at the moment when Trump has made himself vulnerable to attrition from some of these bros. But let me just read this to you. This is actually the subject. The reason I opened with this is that this is the subject of my next column for the LA Times, not specifically Sydney Sweeney. But let me read. I'm going to give you 3 headlines from like the last 10 days in the New York Times. Okay, so these are all prominent. These are not news reports. These are like opinion think pieces, but they're in the New York Times. The boy crisis is overblown. The trouble with wanting men, and my favorite, why women are weary of man keeping, a term I had never actually heard of.
Man keeping.
This is like in the last 10 days in the New York Times, the paper of record, the gray lady, whatever you want to call it. And it's like they're trying to provoke a war between the sexes, and they're casting men. And look, a lot of guys are losers, but a lot of people are bad people. I mean, like, what are they up to, Charlie?
No, I think that's exactly what America needs right now with all of the things that are happening in the world and with the economy and with the Constitution. We really ought to have a more robust convening about toxic masculinity again. So I will say that this is a flashback again to the before times, because there was a lot of evidence that boys were, in crisis. There was a real problem with boys, and yet the discourse was dominated by the people who were talking about the toxicity of men, how men needed to do X, Y, and Z, and a lot of it was not wrong, but it was this refusal to acknowledge that we have been ignoring what's been happening to young men for a very long time. Young men are more likely to be alcoholics. They're more likely to be, arrested. They're more likely to drop out of school. They're most likely to die early. In the colleges, I mean, in many ways, this is a great thing that they opened the doors, but you started to see that young women were really thriving, and this was great. But the discourse didn't catch up with the fact that, hey, by the way, who's left behind? These men. And so I did kind of have that flashes as you're saying, like, let's talk about how terrible Sydney Sweeney is and the men who are looking at her. Okay. Great.
I've mentioned this before, but right around Donald Trump's first inauguration, there was that women's march. And at the time, I was a CNN contributor. So I had to talk about this thing every hour, you know what I mean? And it just, you try to come up with something new to say. And there was one segment I was on Don Lemon's show. And having said everything that could be possibly said, I said, it is interesting, though, Don, that these, women are outraged. But the truth is that there are a lot of men out there who are struggling. And in fact, and I went through the litany of things you just described. And I talked about how that there's this epidemic of loneliness, and it's not good for all these single men to be single. That's part of the problem. And these men, because of they've been left behind by our, technology and all that, they're unmarriageable. And Don laughed in my face on air and thought what I had just said was utterly absurd. I don't think he was at all familiar with this whole concept of men being left behind, and that actually is part of what is driving Trumpism. And by the way, I think the last time I checked, in 2024, it was actually these young apolitical men otherwise who actually reelected Donald Trump.
Well, okay, so the fact that you made a point, that you made a perfectly valid point, and you laughed at it, is another indication of what happens when you get into a bubble, an alternative reality where a lot of these things are just like not on the radar screen at all. And I think we are seeing this. Look, I mean, I understand the people who are listening to this saying, "Oh, great, we have these, two middle-aged cis white guys talking about, the crisis of masculinity. Boo hoo, boo hoo." Okay, we're fine. We're doing great. No problems here. It is, though, a reality that you have a lot of young men. I was at a seminar, and I'm trying to remember his name, who was talking about. This is somebody who I think is a liberal. You may have had him on your podcast. He's written about the crisis of young men, and he's British. Do you remember? You know what I'm talking about here?
No.
And it was great. And he was saying, that at
is it Richard Reeves?
Yes, it is Richard Reeves.
Okay.
Exactly. And he's telling the story about
really sharp. Yeah,
Really,
really sharp.
really sharp. And again, he's not doesn't come from MAGA world or the right wing. And he says that there was this moment in British politics where there was some committee or something. I'm going to get this completely wrong. Wanted to focus on the problem of young men. We have a problem here. And that the Labor Party at the time said, no, 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 we don't even want to look at that. We don't even want to deal with that. We don't even want to acknowledge that it exists. It exists. And it is not a concession to sexism for people to acknowledge it's a problem. But again, can we just go back to this? And by the way, so I email you that I want to talk about Israel and Gaza, and you start off with Sydney Sweeney. Okay, so this is what's wrong with America today.
I sandbagged you, Charlie. I
To
sandbagged
remind people, well, no. So I'm willing to go along with this. I'm just saying that people who are like posting even on my website about, Charlie, you don't understand, the dog whistles and the problem of sexism. Is like, do you have any idea how ridiculous you look? This is the thing. Do you understand why people look at you and go, yeah, we're not on the same team here. I don't even know what we are talking about. And this again is part of the problem. And we've talked endlessly about bubbles and everything. Is that you and I think this was a problem, pre-Trump for the left, is that they created a world in which they created their own language and their own obsessions, and it seemed completely normal to them. And they did not understand how they sounded when they walked out of the room to people who were living in the real world, struggling with real world politics. And it's not just the language; it's the entire framing of the issue. And again, this is my caution to the people out there who are going, no, you guys are missing the whole point. This is how Hitler came to power. It started with no, people, just stop, look around you, okay, touch grass.
By the way,
look at the sky.
Yeah, kiss a girl, as William Shatner famously advised to Trekkies who were too Trekkie.
Harsh.
And I'll say, look, it's a double entendre. Number one, it's spelled
jeans.
Jeans, like blue jeans. And then I feel like you could have a black girlfriend and that's very attractive and say to someone, she's got some good genes, man. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that that's inherently related to eugenics or white supremacy. Maybe in this culture that we now live in, it was I don't know if they were trolling us with that, but
no, you know what? See, this is again, and I think you and I have lived through this as well. The problem, and I am, I hope you feel the some of the old frustration bubbling up here. That look, racism and eugenics these are real things. These are real things. But if you cry wolf all the time, if you work yourself up into high dudgeon and you write, flaming op-ed pieces about gene ads and saying this is the problem, that don't, when the real thing comes along, people are not going to recognize. And this is part of the problem with Donald Trump. Donald Trump came on with all of his, and Tucker Carlson with some of the most viciously, historically racist imagery when they're talking about Haitians eating dogs and everything. And people are saying, this is racist. This is pure raw racism. You had a lot of Americans who said, hey, you've been calling us racist for 20 years now. You said John McCain was racist. You said that Mitt Romney was racist. You said that every single person that you disagree with, if you were in favor of school choice,
Rick Perry and his rock on his ranch. Or George Allen. Well, maybe that macaca thing was was racist, but you get my point. Everybody's racist, and it usually comes out in October before the election that this is published.
But again, I mean, it's the crying wolf problem made it really difficult because I found being on conservative talk radio that when I said what Donald Trump is saying is blatantly racist, everybody just rolled their eyes and said, okay, you know what, that word that that used to be nuclear. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when you were accused of being a racist, that was like the worst thing that could possibly happen. People had become numbed out to it. So again, part of this is like, pick your targets, people. I mean, really, it's, there are beautiful, attractive women that are selling jeans. We have bigger issues to deal with. So try not to totally shitify the discourse over this particular story. Please, would you just, everybody.
People can attack you can go after a lot of things, but not Sydney Sweeney. I mean, that's where I draw the line. But anyway,
Yeah.
I digress. Charlie, the timing of this is interesting because just as these feminists and progressives are writing these think pieces about how men suck, men are suddenly open. They're criticizing Shane Gillis, Joe Rogan, Theo Vaughn. You go down the list.
The
There's a lot
manosphere.
of these bro podcaster guys who are mocking Trump. South Park. I mean, I don't put them in exactly the same category, but what they're doing is South Park, and you've made this point on MSNBC. South Park is mocking Trump for basically being involved in cancel culture. Because it used to be, in the olden days, it was the right, not the right, but conservatives who were the prudes, who were policing everything, wagging their fingers, right? And we weren't cool. The conservatives, we weren't cool, but the liberals, they were cool. They were open-minded. They were free speech.
Right.
Then it kind of changed, right? And you had the kind of the woke culture warriors who were canceling people. They became lame. And now I think maybe it's tipping back the other way. But it's just weird to me that at this moment where men are suddenly, there's an opportunity, I think, where Democrats could, and Democrats ostensibly are spending a lot of money to do just that, but their allies, in the media and the culture seem to be undermining that effort.
That was a deep sigh. I hope that came through. No, so the manosphere, which I'm not going to try to take too seriously, but it did play a role in the election, and clearly you see the demographic problems, and they are becoming disillusioned with Donald Trump. They are beginning to turn on him. I mean, the South Park. I mean, the South Park attack on, well, I mean, first of all, it was hilarious. I mean, I'm a big South Park fan. But the fact that it came like right after they signed this $1.5 billion deal with Paramount. So it was a big middle finger to their corporate bosses, their cowardly corporate bosses, as well as Donald Trump. So you did see this, there's sort of a vibe shift, and so what does the left do? Let's pick this absolutely ridiculous target of Sydney Sweeney. So hopefully this too shall pass. However, it's a reminder that there is still that subculture there, just looking for something to be offended. They're just walking around, locked and loaded, waiting for you and I to talk about the wrong thing in the wrong way, and then we'll be canceled. And by the way, speaking of cancel culture, I mean, like 5 minutes ago, so cancel culture used to be a right-wing thing, then it was a left-wing thing, now it's a right-wing thing, now it's it's like, do you remember like 10 minutes ago that at CPAC, it was all about ending the cancel culture? And now Trump and MAGA are like totally into the cancel culture. Let's cancel Stephen Colbert. Let's cancel all of these other folks and everything. And it's like, do you even remember what you said like 10 minutes ago about the cancel culture? This is part of the enshittification of our discourse, is that people just switch sides on all of this without even blinking, without even being aware of wait, weren't you the guy?
But that's the thing, Charlie, about some of these bro podcasters. They're not, and look, they've got problems. I'm not going to say they're good people, but they're not hacks. They're not partisan ideologues or partisan hacks. Some of them are really concerned, we'll get to this, about Gaza. And they're mad at Trump for supporting Israel and Netanyahu, right? That's Theo Vaughn primarily. Some of them are really upset about Iran, about bombing Iran, and some of them, like Shane Gillis, just are mocking Trump over he's obviously in the Epstein files. He's obviously trying to cover it up.
Of course he is.
And so they really are, so far, calling him out. Now, Charlie Kirk's in a different category, but I'm talking about these kind of guys who once were Democrats.
These are the Trump adjacent guys, as opposed to the Trump, spittle licks like Charlie Kirk. He's in that hardcore. And I think people sometimes don't make that distinction, that you have, MAGA proper, and then you have the suburbs of MAGA, and then you have the MAGA curious folks. And the manosphere, I think, has been sort of either a suburb or MAGA curious. Yes. And by the way, can I just ask a quick question though? Okay,
please.
Matt. So we started off defending Sydney Sweeney. We are both pro Sydney Sweeney. Are we now Are we part of the manosphere? Can we be a broadcast now? I mean, why not?
I
Why
think
are we not a broadcast?
today's episode could be considered a broadcast, and if we did this regularly, and maybe we up our lifting of weights. We sell some
Yeah,
protein shakes, some creatine. Is that what they sell? Well, whatever. We start. We get into some
creatine.
vitamins. I've got supplements.
We get
Um,
really okay. We
triple
could we
magnesium
could do
right
this
here.
because I mean, if this is rebranding. I mean, like it's like we're going from like the characters, the Muppets, the old guy podcast talking about the kids, right? Okay, we've done that and we've had some success at that, but maybe it's time to rebrand into
I'm
that.
game
Okay,
with
so
becoming. We could start doing stand up too. Who's to say we're not comedians? I mean, what is a comedian? We could open up
hmm.
our own little mothership in Wisconsin.
Well, this is the other thing about comedy is like you don't want to have the left go back to the that's not funny vibe.
Yeah.
Okay, really, guys, you know, there was a time when, never mind. I just
Well, I want to ask you about an interesting possible maneuver. I'm not sure if Trump is going to be able to pull this off. But there was this woman named Ashley Babbitt who stormed the Capitol and was breaking glass, trying to get into the area where our senators, I think, were hiding. And after disobeying police commands, she was shot and killed. And they made her not into a victim, but into a sort of a martyr. And I believe that the government even paid her money or paid her family
lots
some sort of
of money.
restitution.
Yeah.
And now I have an interesting comparison, and that comparison is someone named Ghislaine Maxwell,
I've heard
if
of
I'm
her.
pronouncing it right. So this
Yeah,
was this was is it Ghislaine? I don't know, but this was Jeffrey Epstein's, I don't know, co-conspirator. She was like sex trafficking with him. Some people say, a lot of people say even worse than Epstein.
Yeah.
And now
Monster.
there is some effort to make her into a hero on the right. Have you seen this?
Yeah, that's not going to work.
You don't think it's going to work?
No, and I'm sorry getting ahead of you. No. I mean, I think that, this is actually a really interesting question because, I think Trump's been flailing. You've talked about this. He's tried one distraction after another, and he just cannot get rid of this. In fact, the amazing thing, and, let's give Trump, credit where credit's due. He's had a lot of success in, changing the subject, right, and doing all of these things.
Oh, yeah.
This is the one exception. Every time he opens his mouth, he extends the story. He makes the story worse. And some of the things he's doing, I think you're going to guarantee that we're talking about this, into the fall. So Ghislaine Maxwell is not a victim. She will not be a victim in large part because there are real victims out there, and they are speaking out, and they will have a voice. And the more Donald Trump elevates the profile of Ghislaine Maxwell, you and I are both mangling it, raise her profile, the more it's going to raise the profile of what actually happened and these victims. So
do you think
I'm sorry,
these real
she's one
victims
of the,
are really are they going to become like a Jennifer Flowers, for lack of a better, like, are they going to be household names? Are we really going to know who they are? Because there's a big disincentive for people who are victims. They want to put it behind them. They don't want to go public and become household names, and then they, and by the way, a lot of times if someone's been victimized, that trauma, number one, the reason they were victimized, they were chosen because they came from some sort of a dysfunctional home where they were perceived as being unreliable. They're vulnerable is the word I'm looking for. And then maybe after the trauma, they've engaged in some activities that would also hamper their credibility. Like, understandably, it's a form of PTSD.
No,
so,
I think okay, so you mentioned Jennifer Flowers, which is an indication that we're still like old guys talking about this because like 90% of our audience is going, who's Jennifer Flowers? Like, hey, 1992 is calling. Part of the problem is that there's no longer a media ecosystem in which anyone can become a household name to everybody. So it depends on, is Fox News going to write about this? Are they going to cover it? Are there going to be hearings? But the the Ashley Babbitt, becomes, the Horst Wessel of, speaking of, like, historical throwbacks of the MAGA movement.
That's a deep cut.
Jelaine,
That goes back to the
Jelaine, really,
1930s.
really deep cut. I'm like one upping you on the deep cut. I went back like 3 or 4 decades there, but Jelaine Maxwell is a sexual predator, and the problem is that MAGA has been marinating in obsession about pedophiles and sex traffickers for years and years and years. So it's not as if she's been fighting the good fight. It's she's going to be one of the hardest people to, shall we say, have her reputation restored. I think that Donald Trump is just going through the list of things that he has, and the pardon power, the power of commutation, is the ultimate power the president has. But I think there's a real possibility this will blow up badly in his face, as opposed to ending the story.
All right. We'll
What do
end
you
the
think?
podcast on
Yeah.
this next topic, which is Israel. Which I lured you onto this
Yeah, I know.
small podcast to discuss. I had a little thing I wrote in Substack where I basically said I'm very pro-Israel. Obviously, they were attacked on October 7th. Obviously, they're surrounded by people who are adversaries. Obviously, it's a state created by people who were fleeing the Holocaust, who said never again.
Yes.
And Hamas is a terrorist organization who kidnapped, raped, tortured, and didn't give back. It still hasn't given back all of the hostages. And so I completely understand that you would want to root them out and move heaven and earth. But now I think we've gotten to a point, based on some of these photos of starvation, where for Israel, even if all you care about is Israel, for their own good, they're losing a lot of the middle of the country, of the world, probably even. So that's a tough place to be if you're Israel.
It is, and I thought your piece was very balanced. I wrote something a little bit earlier in the week, saying there's several things that can be true at the same time. I am also pro-Israel. I've been pro-Israel my whole life. Regarded them as this redoubt of democracy and kind of a symbol of decency and courage. So Israel has a right to exist. It has the right to defend itself. Hamas is the epicenter of evil. What they did on October 7th richly deserved a robust military response. I think a lot of the criticism of Israel and the defense of Hamas has been anti-Semitic, and I think it has been morally depraved, and I've written about that. But you can think all those things at the same time and go, Israel under Bibi Netanyahu is squandering a generation's worth of goodwill. And unfortunately, and I said this, I was worked up about this, having seen the same pictures, saying, Bibi Netanyahu is going to be remembered as one of the monsters of history. Because even though this was originally a just war, even just wars can become monstrous. And I think he will be remembered as a monster of history for these atrocities. You can't have, and again, I'm not naive. I don't believe Hamas's numbers. I don't trust the United Nations numbers, but there's overwhelming evidence that you're talking about 40, 50, 60,000 deaths. I mean, we're not in the 1940s. It is possible to wage war without the indiscriminate slaughter of women, children, other civilians. And so, yes, you have this point where even those of us who have been adamant supporters of Israel's right to exist say, he's doing it. And I think the point you made is very, very important, is that, okay, let's say that they achieve all of their military aims. If they have turned the world against them, if they have isolated themselves, if an entire generation of young people look at them and go, I'm sorry, they're not the good guys. Why are they we see Vladimir Putin, bombing civilian areas, and we all recognize that he's a war criminal. We see Bibi Netanyahu. Now the enemy is different, the circumstances are different, but the lives are, the human lives are still there. And I'm sorry, just going one more point, because I should have explained it more carefully than I did, because I do think that we're in an era right now where every single day is a moral test for us. What are we willing to support? What are we willing to tolerate? And I think since we were doing deep dives into history, I always ask myself, what would you have done during this particular here, if you knew about this atrocity or this massacre or this famine, what would you have done? And the answer is, well, this is happening right now. And this is part of the disease of ideology, is that our side can do no wrong. So I
Hmm.
want to defend Israel, but I do not want to be defending what you've been talking about here. And this is a morally complex, issue. It's hard. And yet, you and I, one of
Yeah.
the reasons why we're in the wilderness is because we're willing to basically call out people that we used to be allied with.
Well, and part of the problem for Israel is that, not only do these people go in, and they're taking, people at rock concerts and stuff like that, and then
Yeah.
they're hiding them, using human
It's just
shields,
pure
hiding them
pure evil. Yeah.
in tunnels. So it's hard. There's going to be collateral damage almost inevitably when
Yeah.
Hamas
Right.
is using Palestinians in Gaza as human shield. But I don't know. I heard the other day. I wish I'd listened to this before I did
Hmm.
my did my little essay. But David French was on the board, and he said
Hmm.
that what Israel should have done is what we did with Petraeus in the Surge, which is you take territory and you hold it. Like you go in, you have to kill people, you have to blow things up, but then you hold it, you govern it, you police it. And obviously there's a problem with that, right? Which is that Israel doesn't want to be perceived as being colonial and conquering and holding the land. But really, otherwise, if you don't do that countersurgency strategy of helping rebuild civil institutions and structures and water and all of that, then you end up going back and just continually blowing up the
Bombing.
same places
Right.
and killing more and more people. And so I thought that was a really, it may well be that Israel made the same mistake in Gaza that we made initially in Iraq in terms of the type of warfare they chose to engage in.
Yeah, well, but there's something about the Bibi Netanyahu and this right wing government. I mean, this is an extremist government. And by the way, I'm really glad that you remind us what Hamas did, and their role. The complexity of this cannot be overstated. I mean, even on the issue of starvation, I mean, how much of this is Israel's fault? How much of this is Hamas's fault? The UN agency that has been clearly infiltrated by Hamas. Is Hamas actually intentionally creating a humanitarian crisis in order to score propaganda points? All of that is possible. Also, so you have that complexity. You also have Bibi Netanyahu, who is facing criminal charges, and he knows that the moment this war ends, he will not only be thrown out as prime minister, but he might face that. So is he prolonging the war? He also has to balance these extreme right wing members of his cabinet with sort of a more rational approach to the war. So there's something particularly, I think, toxic about this particular moment. Not to mention the fact, which I can't get my head around, up until October 7th, Netanyahu's government was actually funding Hamas, was actually supportive of Hamas. So you can get lost in this tangle of political complexity. But then we're having a moment of moral clarity where you are seeing these starving children or the bodies of children who have been blown up. And that's the moment of moral clarity. Is that what Israel wants to be? Is that what Israel wants to project to the world? Is that how we want to be remembered? Is this something that we are willing to support and tolerate? So almost like push away the politics, push away the complexity of it, and go, okay, that child, what is the moral obligation that we have? What should we be doing? And I think that this is the moment. I think you and I have both done this. This is wrong. Let's we can debate the other stuff, but you have to stop the starvation, stop killing innocent civilians, figure out a way to achieve your aims without committing atrocities. Now, I understand the people, you have Winston Churchill behind you. During World War II, we engaged in indiscriminate bombing of cities, as did the Germans. with civilians. But you know what? This is not 1943 anymore. It is not 1944. We are not, the moral choices that we make are not the same as them. And quite frankly, I'm going to admit that you go back and you sort of see some of the things that we've done in the past, and you go, okay, would we drop an atomic bomb on civilians today? Vladimir Putin would, maybe the Chinese would, but if we are the good guys, are we still going to be dropping bombs on residential complexes? I'm sorry, I went on too long. Can we talk about Sydney Sweeney again? Because I'm having a lot less fun with this than with Sydney Sweeney. I really am.
I knew. See, I was going to say, think of our range. Who else could go start a show talking about Sydney Sweeney and end with Gaza? We've covered a lot of ground. Unfortunately, I think you cost us our designation as a Manosphere Bro podcast. There's a box that you have to check if you want to get that designation, and I have to uncheck it now, thanks to this political, geopolitical commentary.
Yeah.
But serious stuff,
I
Charlie.
apologize for that.
It is. Well, it is what it is.
It is, and look, there's so many things in the world that feel upside down, and I think that's part of our task is not simply always cheerlead, as you and I both have lived through this, is to say, okay, maybe you and I are irrelevant in this particular debate, but the only thing that we can control is what we are willing to say, and I would rather talk about something else other than this, but it is important to speak out when you see something awful happening.
I think it needs to be said. I'm also happy that we wore our outfits today, because you know what I'm reminded of? A Jefferson Davis hog, and was it Abraham Lincoln hog? Do you remember this? J.D. Hogg from the Dukes of Hazzard always wore a white suit. And he was this corrupt political boss in Hazard County, but he in a very famous episode, he had a twin brother, possibly named Abraham Lincoln, maybe Ulysses S. Grant Hogg, I'm not sure, who wore an all black suit. So that is our role for today. So that means ironically, that means you're the good guy and I'm the bad guy in that scenario.
I'm willing to
Charlie
take it. What can I say? Apologize for losing the bromance label. But that's what you get bringing on old white guys, old retreads.
Check him out. Read To the Contrary. See him on MSNBC and YouTube and wherever. Get the books. Get the collection.
All the books.
Be a Charlie Sykes completist. Yeah. Charlie Sykes.
Do you remember when we used to write books and read books? Do you remember that period? Are we that old? Yeah,
it was so good. Yeah, I enjoyed that. I liked writing. We'll get back there one of these days after Donald Trump moves on and it's AOC versus JD Vance.
Okay, but you inspired me. You do know this, right? That my book, How the Right Lost Its Mind, was really inspired by your book, which was pre-Trump, Too Dumb to Fail, which was still if you want to go back into the before times, you called it out, too dumb to fail. And unfortunately, we didn't pay enough attention, Matt. So I want to apologize for that too.
Well, thank you for your kind words about the book over the years. I do appreciate it. And we were both ahead of the curve. We both saw this coming, and we were standing athwart Trumpism, yelling "Stop!" And nobody listened. Sadly,
you can't be serious, really, people.
All right, my friend. Talk to you soon.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.